So I need some of you to start singing the birthday song. Ready?
Birthday to you. Happy birthday to you. Happy birthday, dear Diehl. Happy birthday to you.
Yeah!
82. No, actually, I'm just a good liar. It's not 82. Well, folks, don't you think, please take a seat, don't you think we owe a big hand to those sponsors of this fabulous event here? Fabulous speakers, reasonably good weather, it's holding up, a lot of activity here, lots of choices, and it's all for free. Do you know that some of these speakers that you've heard here, people pay large amounts of money to hear them? And these sponsors here, Lee Memorial, Lee Health now, and then also the Blue Zone Project, make this available to the community. This is community service at best. Let's give them a hand again. Now, I was the director of education at the Nathan Pritikin Center many years ago in the 1970s. And I saw firsthand what can happen to people that are willing to make some lifestyle changes as diabetics. People who had been on insulin for 10, 15, 20 years, people on medication for 5, 10 years, within 4 weeks, 44% of the people on insulin were off their insulin. 90% of these people were off their medications by and large. 4 weeks. So I have some very important concept to share with you today. Let me see what our slides say here. I have some rather sad news. I have some terrifying news. I have some scary news for you. And that is that every second American adult either has diabetes or is developing diabetes. Now, if you are average American adults, that means every second person, take a look at the person next to you. He may be a diabetic or a pre-diabetic. These are the statistics. Every second person, adult in this country, either has developed diabetes or is developing diabetes. We call this pre-diabetes. Now, after those terrifying news, let me give some good news. Are you ready for this? We know... What's happening? Oh, yeah. We know that we can reverse this disease. We know that we can reverse it in weeks. And here it is. What's happening to my... Oh, I see. Please note, these are the best statistics that we know. 50 to 75% of type 2 diabetics on insulin and 80 to 90% of those on pills could normalize their blood sugars and be off medication within weeks if they change their diet. This is not coming from some kind of a vegetarian fanatic. No, this is a very respected and renowned professor of medicine, Dr. James Anderson, who has written over 500 scientific papers, published many, many books about the reversibility of diabetes. You have to become the CEO of your own health. Don't rely on your physicians. Don't rely on those who push the pills. You need to take charge of your health, and you can. Just to give you some idea of how this epidemic has evolved. 1994, 5% of the American adults were diabetics. 1997, 3 years later, 6%. 2 years later, 7%. 3 years later, 8%. 3 years later, 9%. 3 years later, 10%. And now 12% of the American public, 12% of the American adults are diabetics. Diabetes is a death sentence. Diabetes is the modern plague. If you follow through on staying with the medical model, If you're willing to take charge of your health, you can reverse this disease and be no longer diabetic in most cases in 4 to 12 weeks. What did I say? How many weeks?
4 to 12.
This is awesome. But you know, much of the diabetes today is related to this picture here. What do you see? What happened to the American chair? It stayed pretty much the same size until 1975, 1980. Something happened. It went from 17 inches there up to 24 inches. What happened in 1970? What happened in 1980? What happened in 1990? The diabetes erupted suddenly. What happened in 1972? We began to eat like kings. Imperial margarine, Burger Kings, Dairy Queens. We changed our diet in the 1970s. So let me mention to you that once you have to work with diabetes, you always have to work also with obesity, because obesity enlarges the likelihood of diabetes by 7 times. Please note here, in the last 20 years, diabetes has increased by 300%. Ladies and gentlemen, this is not a genetic disease. You're not condemned by your genes. This is not genetics. To change the genetics in society takes about 300 years. This happened in 20, 30 years. This is a disease of lifestyle rather than a disease of genetics, where we are condemned and people say, well, you just picked the wrong grandparents. We don't just pass genes from one generation to the next. We also pass recipes from one generation to the next. And so today, every 3rd baby born in this country will become a diabetic in a lifetime. Every 3rd baby will become a diabetic in the lifetime of that person. So we have 116 million diabetics and pre-diabetics. This means that in America, every 2nd adult has diabetes or is developing diabetes. Here's some questions for you. How do you know that you might be at risk for diabetes? What are some of the symptoms that you can develop? Give me some answers. This is the reading test. Can you read this? Okay, tell me. Increased thirst. So you are thirsty all the time, so you go to the bathroom more, so you have more frequent urination. Then you have increased hunger. You're already overweight, and yet you're hungry and hungry and hungry. Then you have blurred eyesight, and you have to worry about feeling tired and tingling in hands and feet, which is very common. And then in men, of course, they have to worry about ED. You know what that is all about, right? Oh, you don't know? Talk to your neighbor. Now, to be a little bit more analytical, when we look at diabetes and how we define it, it's not just by the symptoms, but we're defining it by the blood sugar levels. And the best blood sugar is usually something under 100 points. Once you have over 125, we usually define you as a diabetic. If you have anything between 100 and 125, you are pre-diabetic, and the chances of becoming a full-blown diabetic is 30% of the people become diabetics within 3 years. So you have a slightly elevated blood sugar, and you say, well, that's just a little bit high. Be careful. You're actually a pre-diabetic, and every 1/3 of you will become a full-blown diabetic within 3 years. Don't take it lightly. The other thing that is very important is that diabetes is a major accelerator of atherosclerosis. You know what atherosclerosis is? Atherosclerosis is the narrowing of the arteries. Atherosclerosis has to do with hardening of the arteries. Atherosclerosis has to do with heart disease, with strokes, well, let's take a look at it. You see it right here. Atherosclerosis and heart disease relates directly to the amount of cholesterol that you have right at the top, the most important factor. And then you go next in line is smoking and high blood pressure. These are 3 factors that drive and give you an indication that you are at risk for heart disease. Atherosclerosis is the underlying disease process. And then comes diabetes. Diabetes, aside from overweight and triglycerides and inactive lifestyle and stress and so on, diabetes accelerates the narrowing and the hardening of the arteries. And you learned today that there are about 60,000 miles of circulatory system, didn't you? And it's those large arteries that are becoming affected in a very prominent way. And once they become affected with this narrowing process that you see here, you're in trouble. We're born with clean arteries. This is a 20-year-old. This is a 45-year-old. This is a 60-year-old, 70-year-old man. You're 45 years of age. You already have 65% of narrowing of these powerful, large vessels, the arteries. That means that not sufficient optimal blood flow is reaching the target organ. So if these vessels are like the coronary arteries are bringing blood to the heart muscle, if these arteries are 70% narrowed down, you no longer have optimal blood flow and oxygen delivery and nutrient delivery to the heart muscle, and the heart muscle begins to cry out, help! I'm starving for oxygen. We call this angina pectoris. The same thing happens to other organs too. Here you see, if it's the, I mean, we have to understand this. You know, when we are 55 years of age, 60 years of age, all of a sudden we have a slight stroke, we have some heart disease, we have erectile dysfunction, and we think, well, I'm 58 years of age, you know, I'm a man, so what do you expect? No! This is a disease. Erectile dysfunction is not a lack of Viagra. That's really a circulatory disease because the penile arteries are much, much smaller than the coronary arteries, and oftentimes they clog up before anything else. So if you want to really have everything looking up for you, I recommend take heart disease seriously. Take the circulatory system seriously. You see, sometimes it's the blood vessels to the kidneys that get clogged up, and then you have to worry about hypertension oftentimes. Sometimes it's the arteries to the legs, and then you have to worry about these problems there. Sometimes these are the arteries to the brain, the cerebral arteries, and then you have to worry about memory loss. And 30% of the estimate of Alzheimer's is probably related to narrowed arteries to the brain. So this is very serious, and diabetes accelerates this process. And so it should be not any surprise to you, and I mentioned to you, as you read, when you have a diabetes person that is at a high risk of blindness. As a matter of fact, diabetes is the #1 cause of blindness and eye problems. Kidney disease is 18 times more frequently found in people with diabetes than no diabetes. And when it comes to heart disease and stroke, your risk is 2 to 4 times higher of developing heart disease and a stroke. And then you have impotence in men. It's usually, oftentimes, it's the first sign of diabetes. Gentlemen, if something doesn't quite work anymore as it should be, right? It might just be the circulatory issue there, and you need to really take that seriously and take to heart what I'm going to share with you today. What everybody else has told you. Move towards a lifestyle that does not cause any artery in your body to narrow down. Be careful with smoking. Smoking causes these penile arteries to narrow down, to clamp down. Move towards a diet that is high in fruits and vegetables, whole grains, and legumes like beans, and a few nuts. I tell you, send me a message when things are looking up for you again. We are here to give you hope. We're here to give you the answer to many of these problems that are not very easily taken care of by medical technology. we have the finest physicians, and we need those when it comes to acute care, when you have an emergency care, when you have infectious diseases, we need these medications. But when it comes to these chronic diseases like heart disease and, for instance, diabetes, we need to have education, inspiration, and motivation, and a change in lifestyle. Are you hearing me very clearly? And if you can't exercise, change the diet that will take care of it. If you can exercise, it gives you an extra benefit. Do it. So up to 80% of the diabetics die from atherosclerosis-related diseases. These are these diseases where the arteries become narrowed down and hardened, where the cholesterol build up, calcium build up, and the fat build up inside the arteries. That's why you want to be careful with fatty foods. That's why you want to be careful with foods that are high in calcium. That's why you want to be careful with foods that have cholesterol and saturated fats. And please note, it's not just the health issues that diabetics have to face. You also face 10 to 15 years of a shortened lifespan. Your lifespan will be shortened by 10 to 15 years because of the diabetes, even if you're under the best of medical care. When you're under medical care, you will take medication and more medication and more medication and more insulin until you're dead. Pharmaceuticals cannot turn this disease around. They can just make you sort of feel better and control the blood sugar somewhat, but it doesn't protect you from the complications of diabetes. Who's in charge? You are the CEO. And here's this good news again from my colleague and friend, Professor James Anderson. 50 to 75% of the type 2 diabetics on insulin and 80 to 90% of those on pills could normalize their blood sugars and be off medication within weeks. All they have to do is change their diet. Well, if you want to really understand what diabetes is, you have to know something about insulin. You know, the cells of the body depend on energy coming into the cell, and that energy is called glucose. And that glucose only gets into those cells, those muscle cells, for instance. It only gets in there if there is a key that opens the cellular gates. So just imagine, there are 100 trillion cells, and they all need to have that energy coming into the cell. It's just like you're filling up a tank with gasoline. These cells depend on this, but you cannot get the energy into the cells, the blood sugar, the glucose, unless you have a special key to open the doors, the gates of these cells. And that key is called insulin. It's a biochemical agent that's produced by the pancreas. And it opens up all the cells. Now, let me show you how it actually works, usually, how it's supposed to work. This is a typical cell. This is the blood surrounding it. Here you have the pancreas. It produces insulin. The insulin comes through the bloodstream, knocks on the door of the cell, and the doors begin to open up, and the blood sugar from here, the glucose, goes inside the cell, and everything is working. You have energy like I have energy now. Something is wrong here, isn't it? Here you see again, you have the blood sugar. It's in the glucose is in the blood. You have the cell, but you have no glucose coming into the cell because what's missing? The key to open the cell is not being produced by the pancreas here, this special organ. There's something wrong. Something has gone awry. Something has caused this pancreas to die, to function less effectively. And so it doesn't produce the insulin, so you don't have the keys to open it up, and this person is going to die in short order. The blood sugar is going to go to 300, 500,000, and it's over, it's coma. This is what we call type 1 diabetes. And these people are dependent on the injection of insulin, and they can live a fairly normal life, especially if they follow the kind of program that you have listened to all day long today. Now, this is now This is now type 2 diabetes. This is a different kind of diabetes. It's different because please note, the insulin is being produced by the pancreas. The pancreas is driving like mad in trying to push out the insulin because somehow the blood sugar cannot get into the cell. Something is blocking the entrance. Somehow the key is there, but the locks are gummed up. So you put the key in, but it doesn't turn. Not very effectively. It's all rusted out. Something's interfering. And we begin to understand now more and more what is causing the gumming up of these locks. It has to do with fat. The amount of fat that you eat, the amount of fat that you carry. These are key factors that are directly related to development of type 2 diabetes. And you thought it was the sugar, didn't you? Well, the sugar doesn't help us because the sugar also turns into extra pounds. So sugar is not in your best interest either. But the key element here is the amount of fat in the diet. So we have about 90% of the diabetics that we have in this country are type 2 diabetics. About 5% are type 1. And then we have sometimes during pregnancy there is some diabetes. But please note, almost all of the diabetes is of this kind where the locks are gummed up, where you produce enough insulin and more than you will ever need, but the insulin cannot do the job because something is wrong with the cell. What do we do medically speaking? When you find a person with pre-diabetes or diabetes, we put them on medication. So we usually put them on pills. 62% of the people are on pills. And then after a while, we begin to put them usually on insulin. And then some of the people are being put on diets. These diets don't work because the diets that we prescribe are usually high-protein diets. And they actually cause a further diminishment of the function of the kidneys. Remember, diabetics already have a risk of developing kidney disease by about 18 times. But when we put them on these kind of high-protein diets, it makes it only worse. So we need to put these people on a very simple diet. A diet of fruits, vegetables, and whole grains, and legumes, and maybe some nuts. So please note that drugs do not cure diabetes. If anything, they can often do more harm than good. We have many, many drugs that show up. They're being promoted as the answer to diabetes, and they have multi-million-dollar budgets to promote these new drugs to the doctors everywhere. And after about 2, 3, 4 years, the results come back: excessive deaths, excessive problems. And then these guys, they drug very quietly, without a whimper, they're gone. And another drug comes, and you think, now we got the answer. And these drug reps, these pharmaceutical representatives, they go to every physician and say, we got the new drug, this will take care of you. Then 3, 4, 5 years later, we didn't realize there are lots of side effects and many, many deaths. You are the CEO. See, that's what we do with diabetes. That's what we do with heart disease. That's what we do with hypertension. What do you think is wrong with this picture? Can you tell me? What's wrong with the picture? I mean, do you see what's happening? The pipes are leaking and everybody's passing out umbrellas. And we can charge nicely for that, and everybody's trying to mop up the floor. You know what we need to do here? We need to call a plumber. This is medical care, that's what we do. We're always mopping up. And we think we have all the answers when we take these medications. Yes, when it comes to these infectious diseases, you have some wonderful drugs that can help you. But when it comes to these chronic diseases, it's lifestyle that's going to be the cause of the problem, and it's going to be the answer to the problem. You've got to change how you live, you have to change how you eat, you have to change how you exercise, you have to change how you think. Well, let me go into some details now. I'm a person that is very oriented towards the epidemiology of these diseases. We study the epidemics and we ask the question, Why do they have an epidemic in this country but not in this country? What are the differences? What could possibly be associated with the disease rates here and the low disease rates here? Are you with me there? So when we go to Japan, it's now 1960. It's very difficult to find diabetes in Japan, just as it is very difficult to find diabetes in populations that are on a traditional plant-based diet. It's difficult to find. Of course, it's changing now with the American diet emerging everywhere around the world. So now I'll take you to Japan. 1960, fewer than 1% of the adults over 40 years of age had diabetes, less than 1%. And then 40 years later, it's now over 15% of the Japanese adults have diabetes. What happened? Did they change the genes in just 40 years? It takes 300 years. Let me show you what happened. We not only brought MacArthur to Japan after the war to establish some democratic concepts in Japan, but we also brought in short order the fast food industry. I mean, I shouldn't mention any names, but you know, they're characterized by some golden arches. You know what I mean? You know these products, don't you? But it's not just them, it's everywhere and everyone that's changing the diet of these people. Just to give you some idea, here you see what happened between 1960 and 2000. You see a dramatic decline in the consumption of starch. Less brown rice, less vegetables, but instead you eat more and more fat. When you have meat, when you have a sirloin steak, that's 60 to 75% fat. Meat is not a high protein food as we sometimes think it is. When you have cheese, you're not thinking, you usually think of calcium. You should think cheese, 70% fat, mostly saturated fat, which is the #1 source of saturated fat in the American diet, which is the #1 cause of high cholesterol because it affects the liver. Cheese. Addictive. It's everywhere. We took it out of the whole milk in the 1970s because the people learned that saturated fat is in milk and it promotes heart disease. That we don't want to have heart disease, we don't want to have whole milk, we want to have skim milk. And the dairy council said, no problem, we give you skim milk, we'll give you blue water. What do you think they did with all the fat they took out of the fat of the milk? What do you think happened to the fat in the milk? They shipped it to China? They shipped it to Africa? No, they created cheese. And they were very clever. They were very clever. They marketed their product very, very well. Every time you take a picture, they say, cheese, right? I mean, these are experts in marketing. From now on, you say, chip, chip, hooray. And then you see what happened here in Japan during those 40 years. The obesity rates dramatically increased, and with it also the rates of diabetes. You see here, you have an increase in obesity, you have an increase in diabetes. These are cousins. Overweight and diabetes go hand in hand. So, you know, you had a wonderful presentation by Chef AJ. I mean, she's fabulous. I dreaded speaking after she was done because there's no one that speaks like her. I mean, she's absolutely terrific. And she told you about caloric density, didn't she? You know, you can have 1 tube of Pringles, that's 1,000 calories, or you can have 10 potatoes, the same number of calories. You can eat those 1,000 calories here in 10 minutes. You can inhale them, they're gone. I ask my medical students, how long would it take you to eat those 10 potatoes? They tell me 10 days. See, it's a concentration of calories because of fat and the oil. And here again you see, this is the American diet. We have experienced 4 major shifts in the last 30, 40 years. Here you see about 44% of the calories that we eat have no nutrition values. They mostly come from snacks. You know, I have people coming to me sometimes, they want to lose some weight, and I ask them, you know, what do you eat? And they never remember the snacks. They tell me, they said, I eat like a bird. I said, what kind of a bird are you? You know, vultures are also birds. And then I tell them about, do you ever take sort of a milkshake, one of those big ones? 2,000 calories? Oh, those snacks count too? 40% of the calories we eat today, snack food. So that's shift number 1. We have moved towards a diet of processed foods. Number 2, shift to animal products. Here you see what happened in the last 100 years. We have doubled the consumption of animal products, and animal products are the only ones that have cholesterol, and they're very, very high in saturated fat. They drive cholesterol in the bloodstream, and they drive heart disease, regardless of what people tell you. This is the 3rd shift now in what happened in the American diet. It's a shift in calories. This is the most important slide for you to think about. I want you to really understand this. This is a diet composition. When you look at the calories, they come from either fats or protein or carbohydrates. And the distribution of these 3 items becomes very, very important. They're called micronutrients. This is perhaps the diet of a poor farmer in Mexico. What do they eat in Mexico? Corn. That's a starch, isn't it? Right. What else do they eat? Beans. That's a starch, isn't it? Largely. What else do they eat? Potatoes. That's a starch, but mostly, isn't it? They have an occasional feast with the community where they have some special roasted pig or something. Please note, in these countries, most of the calories come from the green color, which is starch. It's usually unrefined starch. That starch is very high in fiber that fills you up. But then the Mexican farmer, barely making a living, says to his wife, I want to retrain myself. I have a career change. I want to go to Mexico City. I'm going to become a programmer. And I send all the money home, and in 3 years I'll bring you up there. So he takes training as a programmer. Before he knows it, he's no longer eating at home, he's eating out. He no longer eats slow food, he eats fast food. He no longer eats corn, he eats Doritos. He no longer eats potatoes, he eats Pringles. He no longer drinks water, he drinks soda pop. He no longer eats beans, he eats burgers. What's happening? The diet is changing as the money comes into the society here, and this is the American composition, where you see most of it's fat and sugar, and whatever starch you have, it's usually refined white flour products, like pizzas and cakes and pastry, these kind of things. And then you have a significant abundance of protein up there. This is the American diet. Whenever you have this kind of a diet composition in any society, within 5 to 10 years, when they introduce this kind of a diet, they will have heart disease, they will have cancer, they have diabetes, they will have obesity, they have hypertension. It's unbelievable how powerful this change in our diet has been in changing our diseases and our level of health. You've seen this picture the day before. This is a typical American diet. That's what a family in North Carolina eats in 1 week. And here you see it again. About 50 to 60% of the calories we eat comes from refined processed foods. These foods have nutrition labels. Do yourself a favor. If a food has a nutrition label, keep it on the sidelines. Do you have nutrition labels on potatoes? On potato chips? On tomatoes? on ketchup, you know what to eat. Nature knows how to put the right ingredients together somehow. We don't. We turn good food over to manufacturers and they change it to make it taste sensations that are irresistible, and they make sure that there's enough fat, oil, and sugar in these products so that it becomes habituating, if not addictive. And then please note, about 26 plus 9, 35% of the calories that we eat, they come from animal sources. Again, there is no fiber in these animal sources. Fiber comes from plants. Those phytochemicals, these powerful micronutrients, they're coming almost exclusively from the plant kingdom. And then, what I want you to take home today, here's the take-home lesson. That is that only 14%, 10 and 4, 14% of all the calories that we eat as a society, only 14% comes from fruits, help me, vegetables, whole grains, legumes, and a few nuts. You're a good class. You already got the mantra, right? You heard it all day long. Fruits, vegetables, whole grains, legumes, and maybe a few nuts. Maybe a little bit of avocado, right? Yeah. So, what can we do to turn this burgeoning epidemic of diabetes around? I want to take you to where I work, and that's Loma Linda University. Big medical school, big center there, and it's also the center of the famous Adventist health study. The government has spent over $25 million to tell us, why do these Adventist people live longer than anybody else? These are the blue zone people. The other day I came to one of these assisted living villas there, and I was ushered into a special room there, and I heard some singing there, and they told me this is the special ladies choir. The prerequisite for joining the choir is you have to be at least 90 years. Now I have to tell you, the enthusiasm for singing was better than the sound that came out, but nevertheless. These people are enthusiastic. My neighbor is 102 years of age. He did surgery, famous surgeon particularly when he was younger. He did surgery until he was 95. No glasses, no hearing aids, same teeth. Unbelievable. What is it? And people sometimes think, well, if I move to Loma Linda, then I'm going to live longer. No, it's not the geographic area. It's what people do. You don't have to become an Adventist, but you have to live like an Adventist. What do they do? No alcohol, or if any, it's very little. They're certainly very, very astute when it comes to no smoking. You know, they have a mini vacation every weekend. They go to church. They're very kind of spiritual people. They have a good support structure. They believe in exercise. They're just good people. They're nice people. And maybe that's the secret. A simple diet, no smoking, alcohol. People always ask me, what about a glass of red wine? I always tell them it's perfectly fine with me. You can have it every February 29th. Especially if you're a woman, because you want to be careful with breast cancer relationships. So, you know, these are the kind of things. Simple diet, exercise, get enough sleep, be a nice person, have a support structure. Take care of some of your medical physicals every so often. Try to assume responsibility for your own health. Well, the government gave Loma Linda, the university there, $25 million because the Adventists have a very homogeneous lifestyle. Everything is pretty much the same, except the Adventists among themselves have a different diet. Let me show you what they have. About 9% of the Adventists, this is in North America now, they studied 100,000 Adventists, The study just came out. They followed them for 7 years, and they counted all the hospital admissions, they counted all the deaths, they know all about their diseases. Here's what they found. They found that 9% of the Adventists in this study are total vegetarians. They also found out that about 31% of them are lacto-ovo-vegetarians. You understand what that is, right? And about 10% of them are fish-eating vegetarians, and about 50% of the people are meat eaters. So then they followed these people for 7 years, and they counted all the deaths, they counted all the diseases, and I just want to focus on diabetes today. That's all I'm going to focus on today. Diabetes among the Adventists. Who do you think has the least diabetes among these 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 groups? See, you're brainwashed already all day long, right? So you know the answer. And that is, these are the Adventist meat eaters. These are the Adventist vegetarians, vegans. And you say, well, my blood sugar is a little bit high, I'm a pre-diabetic, but I'm not ready to move all the way from red to green, which is okay. I mean, you can settle for this category, be a fish-eating vegetarian, and you can settle for, you know, you're 50 or 80 years of age, you settle for, I'm just giving up 3 of my toes. And I'm just giving up, you know, I'm just settling for impotence. It's okay. What do you want in life? It's up to you. You decide what your goals are. You decide if you want to see the grandkids growing up. You decide whether you want to have your kidneys to work and to be getting out of diabetes. It's really, really largely up to you. You make that decision. All I can do is provide you with the education here. This is one of the latest large articles from a huge study that came out that talked about how can we best prevent heart disease and how can we best prevent diabetes. And they said we should increase our food consumption by 3 times more fruit, 2 to 3 times more vegetables and legumes. What is this one? 2 times more nuts, 6 times more whole grains, 6 times more whole grains. And they talked about red meat, reduce it to 3 ounces a week. You know how much that is? That's a deck of cards. You might as well hang it up, it's not worth it. And then they looked at processed meat. How much processed meat should you have? 0. How much of the sugary beverage is 0? And sodium, cut it in half. Preventing disease. Now I wanted to talk to you a little bit more about how you can create diabetes. It's very easy to do. They did this in 1927. They gave medical students a very high-fat diet. They gave them hash browns and salami and cheese and cream and ice cream, margarine, butter, and all these kind of things. And then they gave the group also sugar and pastry and candy and white bread and bananas, baked potatoes, all these kind of things. Guess who had the diabetes? Within 2 weeks, 70% of these medical students had developed diabetes being on the high-fat diet. Not the high-carb sugar diet, but the high-fat diet. You mean to tell me that maybe it's the high-fat content? Exactly. Here, I'll show you again. In the 1935 years, they found that the more fat in the diet, the more diabetes was there. In Colorado, a study found these were pre-diabetics. They followed them for 3 years. Those pre-diabetics that had the most fat in the diet had the highest risk of developing full-blown diabetes. Study number 4, Harvard. 85,000 pre-diabetic nurses followed for 16 years. Some of them become full-blown diabetics. What was the main reason? 91% was related to lifestyle, and the biggest factor was obesity. Those that were obese had 40 times the risk of becoming diabetics. And then you go to, hello? You go to the famous, what they call a DPP study. This is very, very interesting because here you have now 3,000 obese pre-diabetics. They followed them for 3 years and they put them on 3 different programs. One group didn't get any intervention. You just live the way you live. It's fine. We just want to see when and how many of you will develop diabetes. And they found that later on, and that 29% of these people became diabetics within 3 years. There was another group. They were putting them on metformin, which is the most popular medication that we use for diabetes today. And in this case, only 21% became diabetics, which is good, isn't it? It's helping. So metformin is helpful. But then they looked at the third group, and here this group was the lifestyle group. And here's what they told these people. We want you to walk half an hour every day. Walking half an hour. Not a big program, right? Just put in 25 minutes a day of walking in. 150 minutes a week. And lose about 7% of your weight. 7% is not very many pounds. Lose some weight, do some walking. Would that make any difference? After 1 year, here's what they found. After 3 years, they found only 14% became full-blown diabetics. Much more successful than the medication that was given to these people. Who is the CEO of your health? Who's calling the shots? These are lifestyle diseases, and medication plays a secondary role. This is a Harvard study that found that those people, this is 200,000 people for 10 years, they found that those people that had at least 2 ounces of processed meat had 50% more diabetes. Why meat? Because meat is a high-fat food. It has no fiber. When they put them on grains, it reduced the diabetes by 35%. It was less. So now, I want to come to the last portion. Is this working here? Yeah. I have some good news for you. Have you heard this before? You can reverse diabetes and be off medication how many weeks?
4.
Many of you as diabetics, tell your friends, can be off medication in weeks if you're willing to make some simple lifestyle changes, such as moving towards a very low-fat diet, a diet that's very high in fiber. Did you hear Dr. Guthrie this morning talk about beans, 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 beans? Right. Here's what we have to learn. People are so confused about these carbohydrates. They said, I cannot eat carbohydrates, and carbohydrates means no starch, because starch turns into sugar. Folks, if you have fiber with the starch, it doesn't turn into sugar so fast, and the blood knows exactly how to respond by means of the pancreatic metering effectiveness. The pancreas knows how much insulin to squirt out and not to overreact when the blood sugar goes up so high, because these refined starches turn into sugar very, very quickly. When you have natural, fiber-rich, starchy foods like corn and beans, you don't have to worry about any big rise in blood sugar. The body knows exactly what to do. That's what we do. We have 85,000 CHIP people in our program. 85,000. 12% of these people are diabetics. Most of these diabetics are no longer diabetics. We put them on a very high starch diet, but it's the unrefined starch. We put them on corn and on beans and on whole wheat and on oats. These are the kind, and vegetables and fruits. Yes, you can eat fruits, not the fruit juices, but fruits. So remember, when you keep the fruit as a whole food, which is the good carb, it has the fiber. When you have the complex carbohydrate, the starches, they're whole food, you have everything going for you. But don't refine the sugar, don't refine the starch. So this is then the fourth shift in the diet in America. We have moved towards refined carbohydrates because we no longer get enough fiber. The average American gets about 10 grams of fiber. How many grams? 10 grams of fiber. We should probably get 40 to 50 to 60 grams. When you get that much fiber, the food goes through your system much faster. Constipation is something you don't even remember anymore. Everything is going well. I mean, you are on the move. No more sitting there for hours and trying to be productive. No. no more anxiety, no more Reader's Digest to finish up. No. You go in, you go out, you're done. Every day. So, here are my last points. We have known since 1933 that when you put people on a low-fat diet with fiber, the diabetes disappears. I'll give you some results here. 1955, this physician took 80 diabetic patients on insulin. He gave them a whole food, plant-based diet. You heard that expression before? This is 1955, and 50 out of these 80 insulin-using diabetics were off insulin in 6 weeks. Did I promise you too much when I said many of you can be off insulin, you can be off these medications within weeks? Please note, 85% of these people were off insulin 18 weeks. This is coming from some of the big British medical journals. Nathan Pritikin, you heard the results this morning from Dr. Stoll. 44% of his patients, type 2 diabetics, were able to stop the insulin within less than 4 weeks. 74% of the patients left the center within less than 4 weeks. I mean, it was amazing what I saw there. It really changed my whole concept of how to practice. Here's Dr. Diehl Barnard. 71% of his patients that were diabetics were able to stop their oral drugs in 26 days. This is our CHIP program here. We had 525 diabetics, and 4 weeks later, there were only 301 diabetics. What happened to the other 224? What happened? What happened? They were no longer diabetics. They all died? No. You can eat yourself out of diabetes. And how do you do it? You have a simple diet. And here are some of my last slides. A simple diet, are my good friends here? Yeah. A simple diet is very low in fat, oil and grease. It is free of cholesterol. It's very high in fiber. Remember, we want to eat more fiber. Plenty of legumes, plenty of meat, beans. It's high antioxidant, low calorie density. It helps with your weight loss. You can eat as much as you want. Eat more and lose weight. Did you hear I say that? Excellent adherence. People love this kind of a food after a while. And the cost, you save 35 to 45%. Folks, there's no better deal that I can offer you today. The prescription for type 2 diabetes is a whole food, plant-strong diet. It's offering the single most powerful and effective remedy to prevent and reverse diabetes. Diabetes, a modern plague. It's a plague, it's a death sentence. But if you take charge of your diabetes, you have every likelihood that you can reverse this disease and eat yourself out of this killer disease within 4 to 12 weeks, especially when you put some exercise into your program where you walk after every meal within 5 minutes. It doesn't mean how far it doesn't mean you have to take long distance walking. Walk for 5 to 10 minutes after every meal that you have, and it brings down the blood sugar levels, and you'll be just a fine person. You have every opportunity to live a full life. You don't have to give up 10 to 15 years. You don't have to give up your health and have all these chronic diseases. Things can look up in many, many, many ways. God bless you. Okay.